The galaxy was in turmoil. For countless millennia, civilizations had thrived across the stars, each one growing in power and knowledge. But all of that was about to change. A deadly force, known only as the Black Tide, was approaching. This strange and mysterious entity consumed everything in its path. Planets, stars, entire systems, all wiped out with no chance of survival. No one knew where it came from or what it was, but its power was undeniable. The Black Tide wasn't a simple disaster. It was a force of nature, and no civilization, no matter how advanced, had ever encountered anything like it before. The ancient Galactic Council, made up of some of the most powerful species in the galaxy, had gathered to discuss what to do. The Council had long been the governing body of the stars, deciding the fates of weaker civilizations and ensuring peace throughout the galaxy. But when faced with the Black Tide, even the Council was divided. Some species argued that it was not their responsibility to intervene. After all, they had no way of defeating such a force, and some believed that it was a natural phenomenon that needed to run its course. One by one, the representatives of each civilization took their turn to speak, and each one echoed the same sentiment. We cannot risk our own survival for the sake of others. They spoke of prioritizing their own species, of saving their people and their worlds. The weaker civilizations in the path of the Black Tide were simply too insignificant to matter. There was nothing to be done for them, they said. They could not afford to sacrifice their own for the sake of these lesser beings. But there was one voice that refused to be silenced. President Emily Hayes of the United Earth Federation, representing the young but rapidly growing human race, stood in the council chamber, staring down at the faces of the galactic elites. Her expression was calm, but her words carried the weight of the future. "This is wrong," she said, her voice firm but measured. "We cannot just stand by and watch others perish because it is too difficult or too dangerous to help them. We are not like you. We do not turn away from those in need." The chamber fell silent. The council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. They were not used to being challenged, especially by such a young species. Earth had only recently joined the galactic stage, and while humans had shown promise, they were still considered inexperienced and naive by the older races. President Hayes continued, "The Black Tide is a threat to all of us. If we do nothing now, there will be no one left to save when it reaches us. We have the power to help, and we will help. The people of Elysian IV, of Viorna, and every other world in the path of this monster. They deserve our help." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the council. The planets Hayes spoke of were remote and underdeveloped, barely able to defend themselves. To the council, they were unimportant, their populations insignificant compared to the highly advanced species in the room. "We cannot afford to be reckless," a representative from the Elvian Empire, a highly intelligent and powerful species, warned. "Your words are noble, but they are also naive. The Black Tide cannot be stopped. Your people are putting themselves in grave danger." President Hayes didn't flinch. "We will take that risk, and we will save as many as we can. If we don't act now, how will we live with ourselves knowing we could have done something?" The room grew tense, but Hayes' words had struck a chord. The humans, for all their youth and inexperience, had shown something that the council had long since forgotten: courage and a sense of justice. The older species had grown cynical over the centuries, too afraid of their own downfall to consider the well-being of others. The debate continued, but it was clear that Hayes' position had gained traction. While some members still disagreed, the majority of the council now realized that humanity was serious. Earth would not stand idly by. The Federation would intervene. And so, the decision was made. The United Earth Federation would be the first to act. They would send a fleet to the first planet in the path of the Black Tide. Elysian IV, a peaceful world home to the Illis, a species that lived in harmony with nature but had little defense against the coming destruction. Humanity would face the Black Tide alone at first, but they would not back down. They would provide aid to the Illis, evacuating them and offering whatever protection they could. And in doing so, humanity would send a message to the galaxy, a message that no matter how dark the times, no matter how powerful the enemy, there was always a choice to make, and humanity had chosen to fight for those who could not fight for themselves. As President Hayes prepared to send her fleet into the unknown, she looked out at the stars. This was only the beginning. The galaxy might turn its back on those in need, but humanity would not. They had made their choice, and in that choice, they would find their destiny. The Federation's fleet was ready. Thousands of ships, each one carrying men and women from all over Earth, lined up in space, waiting for the order to move. The mission was clear. They would head to Elysian IV, a peaceful planet in the path of the Black Tide, and they would save its people, no matter what. Captain Daniel Wright, a seasoned officer with the United Earth Fleet, stood on the bridge of the flagship Hopebringer. His face was calm, but inside, he was feeling the weight of the task ahead. The Black Tide was an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. No one knew how to stop it. All they knew was that they had to try. "Captain, the fleet is ready for deployment," Lieutenant Rachel Kim reported, her voice steady. She was a young officer, but her skill and determination had earned her a position on the Hopebringer. "All ships are in position and awaiting your command." Captain Wright nodded. "Initiate the jump. Prepare for warp." The fleet of over 200 ships blinked out of sight in an instant, disappearing into the vastness of space. Within moments, they arrived at the edge of the Elysian system, and what they saw took their breath away. Elysian IV was a beautiful planet, its surface covered in vast oceans and lush forests. But the skies above were darkening rapidly. A massive, swirling cloud of energy was approaching the planet from deep space. The Black Tide was already making its move. It was only a matter of time before it would strike. As the fleet moved closer to the planet, they sent a transmission to the Elysians, offering aid. The Elysians, who had been monitoring the threat from the Black Tide, had been in a state of panic. They had never faced such a disaster. Their planet was not equipped to handle a force like this. When the humans arrived, they were met with a mixture of hope and fear. The Elysians were a peaceful species, known for their calm nature and deep connection to the environment. They had little to no military technology, and the thought of fighting such an unstoppable force was beyond them. In the heart of Elysian IV's capital city, the leaders of the Elysian Council gathered in a large hall. They had received the message from the Federation, but they were unsure of what to do. They knew that the humans were offering help, but would it be enough? Could they truly stop the Black Tide? "We have no choice," said Ryanth, the eldest member of the council. His voice was deep and full of concern. "If we refuse their help, we will face certain extinction. But even with their assistance, can we hope to survive?" "Humanity has never faced anything like this either," said Lyra, a younger council member. "How can we trust them?" But just then, a transmission came through from the Federation's fleet. It was a message from President Hayes herself. "We are here to help you, no matter the cost," the message said. "We will protect your people and guide you to safety. Our ships will assist with evacuations and provide whatever technology we can to help you defend your planet. You are not alone." The council members looked at each other in stunned silence. The humans had made a promise. They were going to try. And in that moment, something shifted in the hearts of the Elysians. They realized that if they didn't act, if they didn't accept humanity's help, they would be lost. Together, they would have a chance. The Federation began its operations immediately. The first priority was evacuation. The Elysian cities were spread out across the planet, and the Federation's fleet worked quickly to move as many people to safety as possible. But the challenge was enormous. The Black Tide was getting closer with every passing moment. There was little time to waste. "Captain, we've just received confirmation from the first wave of evacuees," Lieutenant Kim said. "We're moving them to the designated safe zones." Wright nodded. his eyes scanning the tactical display. Good. Let's keep it moving. We don't have much time before the black tide hits. As the Federation ships worked to evacuate the Elysians, a new problem arose. The black tide wasn't just an unstoppable wave of destruction. It was intelligent. The closer the entity got to the planet, the more it seemed to react to the Federation's movements. The fleet's efforts to evacuate the Elysians were being met with interference. A massive burst of energy shot out from the black tide, striking a Federation vessel and sending it spiraling into the atmosphere. The ship exploded in a burst of light, and the shockwave sent ripples through the nearby ships. "Damage report," Captain Wright shouted, his voice steady despite the panic on the bridge. "We've lost the Aurora," Lieutenant Kim said grimly. "The ship's gone, Captain. We're down a cruiser." Wright clenched his fists. Losing a ship was always difficult, but in this situation, it was even more devastating. They couldn't afford to lose any more ships. The black tide was adapting to their movements. It was learning. "This won't stop us," Wright said, his voice firm. "We keep moving forward. Prepare for full defensive protocols. The people of Elysian IV are counting on us." As the Federation fought to protect the Elysian people, the gravity of their mission settled in. This wasn't just about saving a planet. It was about making a stand. Humanity had chosen to help, even when the rest of the galaxy turned away. They had chosen to act, and in doing so, they were showing the universe that there was still hope, even in the face of the darkest of forces. The battle for Elysian IV had only just begun, and humanity would not back down. The Federation's mission to Elysian IV was in full swing. Despite the chaos brought by the black tide, humanity was making progress. Many of the Elysian citizens had been evacuated to safety, and the Federation's fleet was pushing hard to buy more time for those who couldn't escape in time. But with each passing day, the threat grew clearer and the risks higher. Back at the Galactic Council, news of humanity's defiance had spread quickly. The older and more powerful civilizations were watching closely, and many were beginning to question the wisdom of Earth's actions. They had all agreed that nothing could stop the black tide. And now, one species, one young, relatively new species, was attempting to go against the tide itself. "Are we really going to let Earth endanger all of us?" asked Dronix, a tall, reptilian leader from the Tesseract Empire. He had a deep, cold voice that made his words even more menacing. "They do not have the resources, the strength, or the knowledge to fight this entity. It will only bring ruin to them, and all of us." The room was filled with murmurs. The council members, all representatives of highly advanced and powerful species, sat in judgment. Most of them had already dismissed the Federation's intervention as reckless, but Dronix's words carried weight. He had a reputation for being coldly logical, and his opinion had swayed many in the council. "The Federation's actions are not just foolish. They're dangerous," said Arlie, a representative from the Hydrath race, a species known for their affinity with the oceans of distant planets. "What if the black tide strikes back and destroys everything? Humanity's refusal to listen to reason is putting us all at risk." President Emily Hayes, still on Elysian IV overseeing the evacuation efforts, was unaware of the full extent of the Council's reaction. She had been focused on one thing: saving the Elysians. She knew the Federation had already lost one ship, and the black tide's power seemed to grow stronger each day. Yet despite these losses, the Federation pushed on. They had made a promise, and humanity would keep that promise. But as humanity took action, the Council moved to strike back. The higher powers of the galaxy were not about to let this challenge go unanswered. They issued a clear warning to the Federation: cease all intervention immediately, or face sanctions. The black tide is beyond anyone's control. The response from President Hayes was swift and defiant. "We will not back down. We made a choice to help. We will honor that decision, no matter what the Council says." With her declaration, she reminded the galaxy that humanity was not afraid to stand alone. But as the Federation continued its efforts, A deep tension began to rise. Many of the galactic species feared that if humanity succeeded, they would no longer be able to maintain control over their own territories. Earth's actions, while noble, were starting to ruffle feathers across the stars. "We need to put a stop to this," Dronix muttered to a group of his allies. "The Earthlings are showing defiance. They cannot be allowed to set a precedent." In response, a small coalition of the galactic elite gathered in secret to discuss what to do about the Federation's interference. They were well aware of Earth's growing influence. They had seen how the humans had rallied their people and how their fleet operated with surprising efficiency. This was not a species to be underestimated. If humanity succeeds in stopping the black tide, it could change everything, one council member said. It could shift the balance of power. The mood turned grim as they realized the truth in those words. The black tide was a massive threat, but if humanity could find a way to stop it, they would gain a level of respect and influence that the galaxy had never seen. And the rest of the galactic civilizations were not ready to give up their power to a young, unknown species. A decision was made. A fleet of surveillance ships was dispatched to Elysian IV. Their mission: to monitor the Federation's actions closely and, if necessary, prevent them from taking any more bold steps. The message was clear. Humanity's growing influence would not be tolerated. The Galactic Council would enforce the status quo. Meanwhile, President Hayes and Captain Wright were aware that things were growing more tense. The Federation's fleet had completed several successful evacuation operations, but they had lost another ship to the black tide. The entity's energy was growing, and it seemed to adapt to the Federation's movements, making each engagement more difficult. Every day, the pressure mounted. They needed to find a way to stop the black tide, and they needed to do it quickly. At the same time, Wright and his crew noticed something odd. The black tide was not just moving in a straight line. It was spreading, shifting, as if it were alive. And the closer it got to Elysian IV, the more it seemed to be aware of the Federation's presence. Something was off. Was it simply a natural force, or was there some intelligence behind it? "We need to figure out what we're really dealing with," Wright said, staring at the tactical display. "Is it just a force of nature, or something more?" The Federation scientists began analyzing the black tide more closely, but answers remained elusive. What was it? Where had it come from? And why was it focused on the Elysian system? As these questions loomed, tensions between the Federation and the Council grew. The threat of the black tide was now secondary to the political struggle that had erupted across the galaxy. The older species feared the rise of humanity's influence, while humanity itself had committed to doing what was right. The galaxy was on the brink of a new chapter. Humanity had made its choice, and the road ahead would not be easy. With the black tide closing in, President Hayes knew they had only one option: continue fighting, no matter what opposition they faced. As the days passed, the black tide continued to move closer to Elysian IV, its dark mass swirling in space like a living thing. The Federation's fleet was running out of time, and the situation was becoming more desperate with each passing moment. President Hayes stood on the command deck of the Hopebringer, staring out at the tactical display, her mind focused on the task ahead. The fleet had evacuated more than half of the Elysian population, but countless others remained behind, still trapped on the surface. The Federation's ships had been moving people to safety, but the black tide was relentless. With each new wave of destruction, the black tide seemed to grow stronger, adapting to their every move. "Captain Wright, we've received a message from the Elysians," Lieutenant Kim reported, her voice steady but tense. "They're asking for our help. They believe the black tide is not just a natural force. It's being controlled by something." Wright glanced at the communication screen. On it was a worried face, the leader of the Elysian Council, Ryanth. "President Hayes, Captain Wright," Ryanth said, his voice filled with a mix of fear and hope. "We believe the black tide is not just a cosmic disaster. There's something behind it. We've studied its movements, and we believe it's not just an entity. It's a weapon. A weapon that's been unleashed on us, and we fear it was made by someone. The revelation hit like a shockwave. A weapon. The Federation had been dealing with the black tide as if it were a force of nature, something beyond control. The idea that it was a weapon, something created by an intelligent species, opened up a whole new set of questions. What kind of weapon could cause this kind of destruction? President Hayes asked, her voice filled with disbelief. And who would unleash it? Ryanth looked pained as he answered. We don't know, but we found signs that suggest the black tide has been deliberately directed toward our world. We have evidence that someone, possibly a highly advanced civilization, has been manipulating it, guiding it towards us. The thought of an intelligent force behind the black tide was a chilling one. If someone had created such a weapon, what were their intentions? And why target the Elysians? We need to find out who's behind this, Hayes said, turning to Captain Wright. We can't just keep fighting blindly. If this is a weapon, we need to know how to stop it. Wright nodded, his face set in determination. I agree. We'll need to investigate, but we can't afford to lose any more time. The black tide is getting closer. The Federation's scientists and military strategists began working together to analyze the new information. It was clear that the black tide was not just a random disaster. It had purpose and direction. But what that purpose was, they could not yet determine. Meanwhile, the other galactic species were watching from the sidelines. Despite their warnings to the Federation, they had not offered any help. Some had even taken a step further, sending ships to monitor the Federation's actions. They wanted to ensure that humanity would not gain too much influence by defeating the black tide. The political tension between the Federation and the Galactic Council was reaching a boiling point. But President Hayes refused to be swayed. She had made a commitment to the Elysians, and she would not back down. We can't afford to waste time on political games, she said, addressing the Council through a secure communication line. The black tide is a threat to all of us, whether you admit it or not. We will find out who is behind it, and we will stop it. Despite the growing pressure from the Galactic Council, the Federation pressed forward. They continued their search for answers, deploying probes to scan the black tide and gather any information they could. Slowly, they began to piece together a terrifying truth. The black tide was indeed a weapon, a sentient one, capable of adjusting its form and behavior based on external input. It was not just a cosmic anomaly. It was a living weapon, created by a long-forgotten civilization, a species that had mastered the art of weaponizing natural forces. The Federation scientists worked tirelessly, studying the data collected by the probes. They discovered that the black tide was controlled by a central intelligence, a network of machines that could manipulate the tide's energy and direct its path. It was like an enormous living organism, but with the intelligence of an advanced species behind it. We've made a breakthrough, Lieutenant Kim said, her voice filled with excitement. We've discovered a way to communicate with the central intelligence of the black tide. We can send signals and attempt to redirect its path. Captain Wright's eyes widened. Can we stop it? Kim hesitated. It's not guaranteed, but it's our best chance. The central intelligence responds to specific frequencies. If we can send the right signal, we might be able to change its course. President Hayes' voice came through the comms. Do whatever you can, Captain. We don't have much time left. With no other options available, Captain Wright and his team prepared to launch a bold operation. They would send a team to the heart of the black tide to transmit the signal that might change its course. But the risks were enormous. No one had ever ventured so close to the black tide. The very idea of reaching the heart of the weapon was nearly impossible. But humanity had made a choice, and no matter how impossible the task seemed, they would not turn back. They would fight to the very end. For the Elysians, for the galaxy, and for the future of humanity itself. As the team prepared for their mission, the pressure was mounting. The black tide was almost at Elysian IV, and humanity's final stand was about to begin. Would they be able to stop the weapon and save the planet? Or would the galaxy's fate be sealed in darkness? The answer was yet to come. The Federation's plan was risky, and everyone knew it. No one had ever attempted anything like this before, sending a team straight into the heart of the Black Tide, the very weapon that was destroying Elysian IV. But with the clock ticking down and the fate of an entire planet at stake, Captain Wright and President Hayes had agreed on the only course of action: a daring mission to disrupt the Black Tide's central intelligence. On board the Hopebringer, Captain Wright stood before his team. His crew had come together as one. Scientists, soldiers, engineers, and diplomats, all united by a common goal. They had no illusions. This was not just a mission to save Elysian IV. It was a mission that would test the very limits of their courage and determination. "We all know the risks," Captain Wright said, his voice calm but firm. "What we're about to do will be dangerous. We'll be going deep into the Black Tide itself, close to the central intelligence. There's no guarantee we'll make it back. But if we succeed, we may have a chance to change the course of history." He paused, looking at each member of the team. Their faces were resolute. This was not a decision any of them had made lightly, but they had all volunteered for the mission. They understood that if they didn't act now, the entire galaxy could fall into darkness. Lieutenant Kim, the Federation's brightest young officer, spoke up. "Captain, we've analyzed the frequency we need to broadcast. If we can get close enough to the central intelligence and send the signal, there's a chance we can stop the Black Tide's advance. But it's going to be like walking into a storm. We won't know if it'll work until we try." "We don't have the luxury of time to test it," Wright replied. "Get to the heart of it, send the signal, and we'll figure the rest out later. I'm trusting you, Lieutenant." Kim nodded and turned to prepare the equipment. It was all in their hands now. The team boarded a smaller, heavily shielded shuttle designed for deep space missions. The Hopebringer's launch bay doors opened, and the shuttle was quickly launched into the vast void of space, heading toward the center of the swirling Black Tide. As they neared the Black Tide, the shuttle was buffeted by powerful energy currents. The stormy black mass of energy seemed alive, pulsating and shifting, as if it were aware of their presence. It was a sight that no one could fully comprehend. It was as if the entire galaxy had been thrown into a nightmare, and the Black Tide was the waking horror. Inside the shuttle, the crew held their breath as the ship was rocked by invisible forces. Despite the technology designed to withstand these violent waves of energy, the crew could feel the intense pull, the sense that they were venturing into the very core of something hostile and unknown. "We're approaching the epicenter," Lieutenant Kim reported, her voice calm but with an edge of tension. "The central intelligence should be just ahead." Captain Wright looked at her. "Are you sure?" Kim checked the readings again. "Yes, Captain. The signal is coming from that center of energy. If we get any closer, we'll be swallowed by the energy, but it's the only chance we have." Wright nodded, setting his jaw. He knew there was no turning back. "Proceed." The shuttle surged forward, dodging the violent currents of the Black Tide. As they got closer, the energy around them grew more intense. It was as if the Black Tide was alive, its very presence reaching out, trying to crush the shuttle in its grasp. But the team was determined. They had one chance to make it work. Inside the shuttle, Lieutenant Kim prepared the device that would send the signal. It was a complicated piece of technology, a powerful transmitter capable of emitting the precise frequency that could potentially disrupt the Black Tide's intelligence. She double-checked everything, knowing that one small mistake could result in disaster. "We're within range," Kim said, her hands steady as she worked. "All systems are ready. It's now or never." Captain Wright gave her a look of quiet determination. "Do it." The signal was sent. The effect was immediate. The Black Tide seemed to shift, its swirling mass of energy reacting to the signal. For a brief moment, the crew saw a break in the energy field, a small opening in the center of the storm. But then, without warning, the Black Tide lashed out. The shuttle was hit by a powerful shockwave, sending it spiraling through the void. The crew held on tight as alarms blared, and the ship was tossed about like a toy in a violent ocean. Kim struggled to regain control of the shuttle, her fingers flying over the controls as she fought to keep them on course. "I've got it," she shouted, finally managing to stabilize the shuttle. But their position had shifted. They were no longer in the clear. "We need to get out of here now," Wright barked. The energy around them was intensifying again, more powerful than before. It was clear that the black tide was responding to the signal, but it wasn't retreating. It was adapting. Kim worked quickly, rerouting power to the shuttle's engines to make a quick escape. The black tide was still reacting to their presence, its energy waves pushing them back, but they had one advantage. They were now inside its defensive perimeter. "We're not going to make it if we don't move faster," Kim said, eyes wide in fear. Wright's face was grim. "I know. Hold on, everyone." The shuttle shot forward, narrowly avoiding another blast of energy from the black tide. As they raced to escape, the team had no idea if their signal had worked, if they had stopped the black tide, or simply made things worse. All they could do was get out alive. But just as hope seemed lost, the black tide began to weaken. The powerful energy waves around them seemed to be dissipating. It was a small sign, but it was enough. "We did it," Kim whispered, disbelief in her voice. But they couldn't celebrate yet. The mission was far from over. They still had to make it back to safety, and they had no way of knowing what would happen next. The galaxy's fate rested in their hands, and the hands of humanity. The shuttle raced through the chaotic waves of the black tide, its engines working overtime to push it away from the center of the storm. Inside, the crew was silent, each person lost in their thoughts. They had sent the signal, but no one knew if it would be enough to stop the black tide. They were alive, but the battle was far from over. Captain Wright's eyes never left the view screen as he watched the stormy black clouds around them. For a moment, everything seemed eerily quiet. The violent energy that had been swirling around them had lessened, as if the black tide were momentarily retreating. "Lieutenant Kim, what's the status on the black tide?" Wright asked, his voice calm but tense. Kim checked the readings again, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. "It's changing, Captain. The energy seems to be dissipating. But there's something off about it. It's as if the black tide is retreating, but it's not completely gone." Wright nodded slowly, his mind racing. They had disrupted the Central Intelligence, but did it mean they had won? Or was this just the beginning of another phase in the storm? "We've got to keep moving," Wright said. "Prepare for a quick exit, Lieutenant. We don't know how much time we have before it comes back stronger." The shuttle pushed forward, slowly making its way back toward the Federation fleet. As they approached the outer edges of the black tide, the crew let out a collective breath. For now, they had escaped its immediate grasp, but there was still uncertainty ahead. The shuttle's communication system beeped, and Lieutenant Kim quickly patched through a message from President Hayes. "Captain Wright, what's the situation?" Hayes's voice came through, clear but filled with concern. "We're still alive, President," Wright replied, keeping his voice steady. "The black tide is retreating, at least for now. We don't know if we've stopped it completely, but we've definitely caused a shift." "Any signs of it returning?" Hayes asked. "Yes," Kim said, her voice grim. "It's weakening, but we believe it's adapting. The Central Intelligence might be recalibrating." "Understood," Hayes replied, a pause in her voice. "Prepare to return to the fleet. We need all ships ready for any possible scenario. And Captain, if it comes back, we'll need to be ready to face it head-on. Humanity's commitment to the Elysian people will not waver." Wright nodded, his face set with determination. "We're on our way, President. The mission isn't over yet." As the shuttle moved away from the black tide, the crew's tension didn't completely ease. The storm may have weakened, but no one believed the danger was over. They had interrupted the black tide's Central Intelligence, but they had no way of knowing if that would be enough to stop it. Back at the Federation fleet, the situation was just as uncertain. The fleet had managed to evacuate most of the Elysian people, but the remaining ships were positioned in defensive formation, waiting for orders from the command ship. The Federation's military was on high alert, watching the skies for any signs of the Black Tide's return. On the command deck of the Hopebringer, President Hayes paced back and forth, her mind racing with the weight of the situation. She had made the decision to send Captain Wright's team into the heart of the Black Tide. Now all she could do was wait and hope that their actions would be enough. "Lieutenant, any updates?" Hayes asked, turning to one of the communication officers. "Nothing yet, Mom," the officer replied. "The shuttle is on its way back, but the Black Tide's status is still fluctuating. We're tracking its movements, but it's too early to tell if the signal has had a lasting effect." Hayes nodded, though she could feel the weight of the uncertainty in the air. If the Black Tide was only temporarily retreating, they would need to act fast. But if the signal had actually disrupted it permanently, they would have a chance to regroup and plan the next steps. The tension on the Hopebringer was palpable. Everyone was waiting for news. The stakes were high, and the future of Elysian IV, and perhaps the entire galaxy, was in their hands. "We've got to make sure we're ready for anything," Hayes said firmly, speaking to the bridge crew. "If the Black Tide comes back, we will face it as one. Humanity is not backing down." Meanwhile, Captain Wright's shuttle finally broke through the outer edge of the Black Tide storm. They were no longer in the immediate danger zone, but the weight of the mission was still heavy. They hadn't just fought for the Elysians, they had fought for their own future. Their actions could change the balance of power in the galaxy. If humanity had stopped the Black Tide, it would send a powerful message to the other galactic species, showing them that Earth was not just a young species, they were a force to be reckoned with. "We're almost there," Kim said, glancing at the view screen. In the distance, the Federation fleet could be seen, its ships like stars in the vast darkness of space. But even as they neared the fleet, no one could shake the nagging feeling that they were still at the edge of a dangerous precipice. As the shuttle prepared to dock with the Hopebringer, Wright turned to his crew. "Whatever happens next, we've made our stand. Humanity has shown its resolve. Let's make sure the galaxy knows that we will do whatever it takes to protect those who can't protect themselves." The shuttle docked with the Hopebringer, and the team was quickly ushered to the command deck. Wright and Kim briefed President Hayes on their findings, and the data they had gathered was analyzed immediately. The Federation scientists were still studying the Black Tide's behavior, trying to determine if it was truly retreating, or if they were only buying time. Outside the command deck's viewports, the stars burned quietly, distant and indifferent. The calm before the storm. Everyone knew that the next few hours, or even minutes, could change everything. The fate of Elysian IV and its people rested on the actions of humanity, and in this moment, humanity was ready to face whatever came next. But one thing was clear: humanity was no longer a species to be overlooked. They had made their choice, and the galaxy would have to take notice. The Federation fleet hovered in the vast emptiness of space, awaiting the inevitable return of the Black Tide. President Hayes stood on the command deck of the Hopebringer, her face lined with exhaustion but still filled with determination. The tension in the air was palpable. The crew was ready, but no one knew exactly what they were preparing for. The message had come in from Captain Wright's team. They had completed their mission. They had sent the signal to disrupt the Black Tide's central intelligence, but no one knew yet if it had worked. The storm, though weakened, was still out there, a massive black cloud swirling in space, waiting to strike again. "We've got no way of knowing for sure if we've stopped it," Captain Wright said, his voice steady but his brow furrowed. He and his team were back on the Hopebringer now, briefing Hayes on the mission. "The Black Tide is adapting, and we've only delayed its progress. But we've learned something important." "What is it, Captain?" Hayes asked, her voice calm but urgent. "We've figured out how it works," Wright replied. The black tide isn't just a natural force. It's a weapon, a living one, capable of self-repair and adaptation. It will keep coming unless we take out its central intelligence for good. Hayes nodded slowly, the weight of the situation settling in. The threat of the black tide had not been defeated. It had only been slowed. The galaxy needed more than just a temporary solution. They needed to end it completely. And the only way to do that was to destroy the intelligence that controlled it. "We need to make one last move," Hayes said, her voice filled with resolve. "We're going to find its heart, and we're going to end this once and for all." The Federation's fleet was ready. All ships had been fully prepared for this final confrontation, with weapons primed and shields at full strength. The plan was simple but dangerous. They would enter the heart of the black tide, where the central intelligence was located, and deliver a strike powerful enough to destroy it. But that was easier said than done. The black tide had proven to be far more resilient than anyone had anticipated, and the heart of it was a place no ship had ever survived. The command deck was buzzing with activity as the officers and crew made final preparations. The mood was somber, but there was a sense of purpose that had not been there before. Humanity had made its stand, and this would be their defining moment. If they succeeded, they would save not only the Elysians but the entire galaxy. If they failed, well, the consequences were unthinkable. "We've received a signal from the Elysians," Lieutenant Kim reported. "They're ready to support us in any way they can. They've built a temporary base on one of their moons, and they're waiting for our command." "Good," Hayes said, nodding. "Tell them to be ready. If we fail, they'll need to be able to evacuate as many people as possible." Captain Wright turned to face the crew, his eyes scanning the faces of those who had fought beside him. "This is it. We go in together. Humanity's strength isn't just in our ships or weapons. It's in our resolve, our willingness to fight for others. We're not just fighting for Elysian IV. We're fighting for every world, every people, and every future in this galaxy." The crew was silent, each person understanding the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about stopping the black tide. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity would not stand idly by while others suffered. The Federation's actions would be remembered, not just for their bravery, but for their commitment to justice. With one final push, the Federation fleet moved toward the black tide. As they entered the storm's chaotic interior, the ship's systems were battered by the violent energy waves that lashed out at them. But they pressed forward, determined to reach the heart of the weapon. The Hopebringer led the charge, its hull glowing with energy as it fought through the turbulent currents of the black tide. The ships behind it followed closely, their weapons locked and ready. The fleet worked as one, each vessel supporting the others as they moved deeper into the heart of the black tide. It was like fighting through a wall of darkness, with only their lights and the faint glow of distant stars to guide them. As they drew closer to the center, the intensity of the black tide's energy grew. The storm seemed to sense their approach, and it reacted by sending out waves of violent force, attempting to push them back. But the Federation fleet held firm, using their advanced shields and weapons to press onward. "We're almost there," Kim reported from the bridge. "I'm detecting something at the core. It's where the central intelligence is located. We can hit it with everything we've got." "Prepare for the final strike," Hayes ordered. "Fire on my command." The fleet closed in on the central intelligence. It was an immense dark structure at the heart of the black tide, its energy pulses flickering like the beating heart of a dying star. It was a weapon, alive and pulsing with power, a machine built to destroy. "Now," Hayes shouted. In that instant, every ship in the fleet unleashed its full arsenal. Laser beams, energy blasts, and missiles of every kind rained down on the central intelligence. The black tide screamed in defiance, but it could not escape the onslaught. The energy waves seemed to dissipate for a moment, as if the black tide was being pushed back. The storm that had terrorized the galaxy for so long seemed to falter. Then, with one final, thunderous explosion, the heart of the black tide was shattered. For a brief moment, Everything was still. The fleet drifted through the void, watching as the last remnants of the black tide crumbled into nothingness. The galaxy had been saved. President Hayes stood on the command deck, staring out into the vastness of space. She could feel the weight of the moment. The mission was over, but the cost had been great. Humanity had won, but it had done so by showing the galaxy that they would fight for what was right, no matter the odds. As the crew celebrated their victory, Hayes looked to the stars. The galaxy was wide, and there were many more challenges ahead. But humanity had proven that it was not just a species to be ignored. They had made their mark, and they would continue to fight for a better future for everyone. And so, humanity's journey continued.